Hey guys, tonight we're slipping off our sandals and stepping gingerly into the warm, steamy fog of an ancient Roman bathhouse. The air is thick with eucalyptus and egos, and the tiled floor is alarmingly slippery for a place with this much naked foot traffic. Your towel's half a napkin. The man beside you is shaving his armpits with a shard of glass. And someone just dropped their communal sponge stick into the pool with a plop you really don't want to think about. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past the changing room, where slaves oil their masters' backs with a bit too much eye contact, and into the tepidarium, the warm room. The mosaics shimmer with condensation, and you spot the mythical hero Hercules in one corner, doing something you're fairly certain wasn't mentioned in your school textbook. The Romans had a way of making every surface instructional. The bathhouse isn't just about hygiene. It's about the scene. Politicians mingle with poets, centurions with sex workers, all wrapped in a steamy cloud of barely disguised innuendo. It's a sauna with a side of scandal. You sit, trying not to look too startled as a man to your left starts humming a song while vigorously exfoliating his neighbor's back. And then there's the sponge on a stick, the tersorium, one communal stick, one shared cleaning tool, dipped into a vinegar bucket and reused across dozens of post-latrine behinds. No one flinches. You, on the other hand, consider how much your immune system just aged. Historians still argue whether bathhouses were officially sanctioned as venues for paid pleasure. Technically, they weren't brothels. But when the marble bench you're sitting on has grooves from years of friction that's not from bath towels, well, let's just say ambiguity was part of the design. In the caldarium, the hot room, you find yourself surrounded by men slathered in scented oils. The scent is part myrrh, part raw ambition. Across from you, a wealthy merchant flirts with a teenage boy, offering him a date. The fruit kind, sure, but also not. Remember, in ancient Rome, relationships were less about gender and more about power. As long as you were the dominant partner, society looked the other way. The passive one, not so lucky. Insults like pathicus or sinitus were hurled not at the sexually active, but at the submissive. It wasn't what you did, it was how you did it. A cheeky aside. This is also the place where Romans had body hair preferences long before modern waxing salons. Men plucked, scraped, and sanded themselves smooth, often with help from their slaves. You're watching one now, a sullen boy using a strigil to scrape the sweat and grime off a senator's back. No pay, no thanks, just hot air and humiliation. And the social scene here, think of it like ancient LinkedIn with nudity. Deals were struck, alliances formed, and enemies subtly insulted via oil choices. Oh, still using saffron, bold of you. One fringe tidbit. Some bathhouses had tiny shrines to Venus or fertility gods tucked into alcoves because nothing says cleanliness like a statue of Priapus staring at you while you towel off. By now, you're starting to feel both more relaxed and significantly more alarmed. The idea of communal cleansing seems wholesome until you notice that one guy brought his goat. No explanation. Just there. As the bathhouse empties and the echoes of chatter fade, you reflect on the duality of Roman hygiene, fastidious cleanliness, combined with the most astonishing disregard for basic germ theory. You dry off with something that feels suspiciously like reused linen. Thank your lucky stars for indoor plumbing and step back onto the street where the real debauchery is only just beginning. You don't get far before your stomach growls, but unfortunately, you're not headed for a bakery. You're headed for the latriny Rome's public toilets. Because in this strange city of marbled decadence and casual filth, even answering nature's call is a social event. You find the nearest one near the Forum. From the outside, it looks deceptively dignified columns, statues, and sometimes even a small fountain babbling politely nearby. But step inside, and you're greeted with a row of stone seats carved with keyhole-shaped holes, all arranged in a long line with absolutely zero dividers. That's right. No stalls, no doors, no privacy, just you, your exposed bottom, and a dozen strangers, all pretending they're not listening. You pick a spot between two tunic-clad elders arguing about olive prices and gingerly lower yourself. The stone is cold, the smells are warm. The experience is intimate. Welcome to the ancient Roman public loo, where social class, political alliances, and bodily functions collide. A woman walks past outside, and you notice the crude etching on the wall behind her, a phallus with wings, captioned with what loosely translates to fly to Venus. It's not graffiti in the modern sense, it's closer to historical Yelp. Some scribbles warn you which latrines have bad plumbing. Others offer, services. One helpful carving reads, "Rest here, traveler, and maybe love will come." Interpret that however you like. Here's the thing, these toilets weren't just functional. They were networking hubs. People came here to do more than just business, if you catch the drift. Senators discussed legislation, merchants planned shipments, and lovers slipped notes under the partitionless gaps, because of course they did. Fringe fact, Roman toilets had running water, but not quite like yours. A shallow channel flowed at the base of the seats, washing away whatever you contributed. And in lieu of toilet paper, enter again the tersorium, that sad little sponge on a stick, reused by everyone after a quick rinse in vinegar or salt water. You stare at the sponge bucket near your feet and wonder if maybe that goat from the bathhouse had a point. And then you spot it, another carving on the wall. Two stick figures, mid-embrace, and a short poem that might make a modern teenager blush. Scholars still argue whether this was meant as body humor, ritual blessing, or something more coded, a way of signaling desires that couldn't be spoken aloud in the street. Just then, the elder to your left starts humming a tavern tune, and the one to your right joins in. You sit there, part of a latrine choir, grateful at least for the acoustics. There's something oddly soothing about the echo of voices bouncing off the stone as your legs go numb. As you finish up, you shuffle toward the communal basin, giving the tersorium a wide berth. A slave dips it in the vinegar bucket, wrings it out with a practiced flick, and offers it to you like it's a treasured family heirloom. You decline with a polite nod and make a mental note to never, ever sneeze in here. Fun side detail: some wealthy Romans paid extra to have their own private chamber pots, but even those had to be emptied by hand, usually by slaves. The rich might have avoided the public toilet scene, but their hired help still had to brave the bucket parade through the city streets, dodging jeers and flying figs. You exit the latrine and gulp down the sweet, fresh air like it's nectar from Mount Olympus. Your tunic feels lighter, your dignity slightly bruised. But now, your curiosity is fully awakened. If the Romans treated toilets like cafes, what else did they turn into flirtation zones? And so, you tighten your belt, step back into the noise of the forum, and head toward the marketplace, where little bronze charms dangle from stalls, promising love, lust, and just a little black magic. The market hums like a living creature. Voices rise and fall in a symphony of haggling. Goats bleat indignantly, and somewhere in the chaos, a child screams with glee or terror. It's hard to tell in Rome. You follow the scent of cumin and roasted figs until your eyes catch a glimmer of something brass and oddly anatomical. Welcome to the world of Roman sex charms. You find yourself at a booth draped in red cloth, where tiny bronze phallic amulets dangle like wind chimes. Some have wings, some have legs. One even has multiple heads, and not all of them are where you'd expect. The vendor, a woman with too many teeth and too few boundaries, beckons you closer and drops a particularly large charm into your palm. For luck, she whispers, or love, or both. In Rome, these weren't crude jokes, they were protective talismans. Called fascina, these charms were hung around children's necks, carved into lintels, and buried in walls. The idea that the image of a ridiculously exaggerated phallus could ward off the evil eye. Historians still argue whether they were truly spiritual tools, status symbols, or just early versions of gag gifts. You slip the charm into your pouch after wiping your hand and explore deeper. A bald man sells potions that claim to inspire uncontrollable lust. Another booth boasts tiny scrolls containing curses, depictions, meant to drive rivals insane or prevent them from performing in bed. You read one that reads, "Bind his loins, O Pluto, until he returns my tunic." Priorities, clearly. Here's a fringe fact. Love spells in Rome often involved disturbing ingredients. You pass a recipe scrawled on papyrus, boiled mouse bones, menstrual blood, and mulled wine, all stirred under the new moon. The seller assures you it works. You assure him you're just browsing. You can't help but smile at how modern all this feels. Rome may have lacked Wi-Fi and indoor refrigeration, but their obsession with love, lust, and trying to outwit fate, timeless. This market is a living Tinder profile, full of charms to attract, potions to manipulate, and curses to punish those who swipe left. A young couple strolls past, giggling as they buy matching charms, hers shaped like a vulva, his like, well, everything else. The vendor throws in a miniature statue of Priapus, the Roman god of fertility, who is eternally frozen mid-salute. He's tucked into gardens to protect crops and ward off thieves, his weapon of choice always. Standing ready, you pause at a small shrine dedicated to Venus. Offerings include flowers, coins, and what appears to be a carved wooden. Is that a flute? No, wait, never mind. You back away slowly. Even respectable matrons get in on the action. One woman buys a necklace said to keep a husband faithful, which seems ambitious given what you saw in the bathhouse. Still, hope springs eternal. Mainstream Roman fact of the day: sexual magic was entirely legal as long as it didn't cause direct harm. You could seduce, entice, or bind with words and tokens, but if your spell poisoned someone, well, that was a step too far. Usually, you can almost hear the modern disclaimers. Results may vary. Not FDA approved. Side effects may include heartbreak, boils, and public shame. You pass a tent curtained in deep purple. Inside, a woman with silver hair reads fortunes. She offers to tell you your romantic future by inspecting the lines of your hand, and also by sniffing a crushed beetle mixed with sandalwood. You politely decline again and wonder if ancient Rome had a refund policy. As the sun begins to lower, casting golden light across the cluttered stalls, you realize that this market isn't just about trinkets and trade. It's a mirror reflecting Rome's chaotic, deeply human need for connection, even if that connection sometimes involves goat fat and a poorly drawn phallus. You tuck your charm away, tip your head to Priapus, and walk on, curious now about where all these enchantments eventually lead, probably somewhere with wine, scandal, and even less clothing than you'd hope. You follow the scent of roasting pork and overheard laughter toward a villa on the Palatine Hill. The sun is setting, and the city begins to glow, not with torchlight, but with anticipation. You're not invited, of course, but in Rome, walls are thin and gossip even thinner, so you sneak in through the garden gate, past a statue of Bacchus holding a goblet, and slide unnoticed into a corner of the atrium. Tonight, you're about to witness one of the most notorious experiences in Roman culture, the upper-class dinner party, also known as the convivium. But this isn't just about food. It's about status, seduction, and letting go of every moral restraint. Once the second course hits the table, your sandals sink into rose petals scattered on the floor, and the couches are draped in imported silks. Slaves weave between guests with trays of fish sauce, honeyed dormice, and platters of oysters, which the Romans considered powerful aphrodisiacs. Even if no one could ever prove why, you take your place along the wall and observe. The guests recline on couches, 3 to a piece, in carefully orchestrated order. The closer to the host, the higher your social rank, and the more likely you'll be fed peeled grapes by a slave who's barely old enough to count. A man in a purple-bordered toga raises his cup and shouts a toast that involves Venus, fig trees, and something about riding a chariot you're pretty sure is not meant literally. Laughter erupts. His wife rolls her eyes and drinks anyway. Here's your mainstream fact. Roman dinner parties had 3 courses: the gustatio appetizer, prima mensa main, and secunda mensa dessert. But dessert wasn't always edible. By the time wine had flowed through all 3 rounds, it was time for the real entertainment to begin. Enter the after-dinner performers. At first, it's musicians and dancers. A woman twirls with castanets, her eyes fixed on a senator who clearly knows her from somewhere he shouldn't have been. Then come the mimes, Rome's uncensored theater troupe. Tonight's sketch, a farce involving a farmer, a goat, and a stolen tunic. You don't get the punchline, but judging by the snorting laughter, it's filthy. Then the lights dim further, someone extinguishes a few lamps, and out come the flute girls and acrobat boys. You notice subtle shifts in body language. Some guests begin leaning a little closer, whispering in ears, hands drifting a little too casually under the tables. A slave refills wine with practiced detachment. Historians still argue whether these parties always descended into orgy, or whether that's just the impression left by scandal-hungry poets like Martial and Juvenal. But based on what you're seeing now, tunics slipping, a man removing his sandals with a wink, a woman feeding another guest grapes with her mouth, it's safe to say things were flexible. One fringe tidbit: some Romans would hire professional erotic readers to recite saucy verses or sing indecent poetry mid-meal. Nothing says fine dining like Ovid's Art of Love delivered in falsetto. You spot a guest sneaking a powder into his wine. It's probably a love potion, or more likely, a laxative meant for revenge. Not all seduction here is innocent, and it's not just the elite playing games. The slaves have their own rhythm of flirtation, exchanging glances behind wine jugs, brushing fingers as they pass. Forbidden, but ever present. As the night stretches on, clothing loosens, language slips into cooing and chuckles, and one couple disappears behind a curtain without so much as a good night. You look around at this elegant chaos and realize the Roman dinner party was theater decadent, sweaty, whispered, and staged, but all too real. Suddenly, a drunk senator starts singing an off-key love song to a gladiator-shaped wine jug. His neighbor joins in. The host begins clapping out of rhythm. It's time to leave. You slip out as quietly as you arrived, passing a line of slaves waiting with cloaks and buckets. One gives you a knowing glance, as if to say, "Every night ends like this." Back on the street, the air feels clearer. The stars above Rome twinkle with the innocence the villa just lost. And you wonder what else they've etched into their walls, besides wine stains and regrets. The sun has long disappeared behind Rome's 7 hills, but the city still breathes in the warm night air. You wander down a quieter street now, your feet aching, but your curiosity fully awake. You follow a flickering torch past closed taverns and laundry, flapping lazily in alley breezes, until you arrive at a wall that moans, not literally, but the things carved into it. They tell stories louder than any bard. Welcome to the erotic graffiti tour of Pompeii, a city frozen in ash, but not in shame. You place a hand on the crumbling wall. It's coarse, ancient, the stone still remembers. And etched into it, in surprisingly elegant lettering, are phrases that range from blushing flirtations to outright anatomical diagrams with helpful arrows. You squint. Is that? Yes. Yes, it is. One reads, "Weep, girl. My heart belongs to the innkeeper's wife." Another, "Lucius screwed here with great skill." A third, less confident, "Don't trust Flavia. She farts." It's art, in its own unapologetic way. Mainstream fact: Pompeii and nearby Herculaneum are absolute gold mines for graffiti, especially sexual in nature. Over 11,000 fragments of inscriptions have been preserved, and no, not all were scandalous. Some were just love notes or betting odds, but many downright raunchy. You wander deeper into the city's ancient grid, guided by half-broken walls and shadowed columns. You pause at the entrance of a once busy tavern. On the wall, a painted sign of a man and woman mid-act, above the caption, "Here, you'll leave satisfied." Charming. One fringe tidbit: scholars believe that some graffiti acted like advertisements, especially outside brothels. Think Yelp, but carved with a knife and no filter. Julia is the best. Ask for the surprise. You're not sure you want to know what that means. You pass the famous Lupener, Pompeii's most well-known brothel, where the walls are lined with frescoes showing different positions like a menu. Each room, tiny and windowless, had a stone bed with a thin mattress, perhaps stuffed with straw, or perhaps just an afterthought. You peek in and try not to imagine the sounds that once filled this tight corridor. And then there's the phalluses. So many phalluses, carved into walls, door frames, fountains, some with wings, some with faces, one even riding a cart. Historians still argue whether they were protective symbols, direction markers to brothels, or just Roman humor at its most literal. This way to pleasure, with a visual aid. You find a quiet bench and sit beneath a mural of Venus, her face half faded, her gaze both mischievous and maternal. It's comforting in a strange way, like the ancients are whispering that humans have always been this awkward and funny and desperate for love. You spot another etching near your feet. If anyone sits here, may they fall in love. It's sweet, it's absurd, it's eternal. And here's where the gently humorous, gently horrifying thought hits you. These weren't jokes written for us. They were messages for each other. Flirtations, warnings, brags, regrets scratched into stone in the belief that someone would read them. And now you are. A dog barks in the distance. The breeze carries the scent of old dust and distant fires. You stand, brushing your tunic clean, and leave the alley behind. The graffiti stays, though, watching, waiting, and probably judging your posture. Your feet carry you downhill, past the echo of laughter and the low mumble of dice games played in back rooms. Rome's nightlife, as you've come to learn, doesn't just sparkle with candlelight, it throbs with a peculiar hunger. And tonight, it draws you toward the Colosseum, not for the games, but for the gladiators. You duck into a shadowed archway and imagine it's morning. The sand in the arena still wet with sweat, the crowd's thunder still hanging in the air, but you're not here for the violence. You're here for the spectacle after the spectacle. Because in ancient Rome, gladiators were sex symbols. And not just to the bored housewives of bored senators, though that's definitely part of it. You find your seat on a chipped stone bench and remember, the man who just fought a lion this morning might now be sipping watered wine in a wealthy woman's garden. Bandaged, oiled, and very much available if the coin or favor was right. Mainstream fact. Gladiators were the rock stars of Rome, with devoted fan bases that carved their names into walls and wept at their deaths. Some even had trading cards, tiles, or pottery featuring their image, name, and win-loss records. Move over tops. One such name echoes through the gossip of the city. Crescens, the net thrower. Women scribbled poetry about him. One even reportedly left her husband after seeing him parry a trident. You wonder if he came with a warning label. A fringe tidbit. Some gladiators sold vials of their sweat and blood to admirers, used in love potions, skincare routines, and allegedly as aphrodisiacs. You try not to gag, imagining someone dabbing a bit of post-arena underarm juice on their neck before a date. You pass a tavern where two young women argue loudly over a scratched mural of a retired champion. One swears she met him once in a bathhouse. The other insists he winked at her before slaying a bear. Both are probably lying. Historians still debate whether gladiators had as much sexual agency as their reputation implies. Many were slaves, after all, and their fame was often as manufactured as their matchups. But that didn't stop Rome from painting fantasies around them. You follow a thread of this hunger into a quiet courtyard. A woman in her 30s, well-draped, well-perfumed, and very much in charge, stands speaking to a house servant. She clutches a small bust of a gladiator polished from repeated handling. You don't eavesdrop, but you can guess the nature of her instructions. The allure wasn't just the muscles or the violence. It was the contrast. Men who could kill by morning and purr by moonlight. Society saw them as both dangerous and disposable, and that made them thrilling. Another side note, some aristocrats even held private, sparring sessions in their homes. Gladiators were hired to wrestle, showcase skills, or pose with sculpted weapons for admiration, education, or pleasure. The lines blurred, often intentionally. You notice how many street vendors sell miniature figurines of famous fighters, some in fighting stance, others reclining. The line between battle trophy and bedroom token seems thin in Rome. A young boy runs past, clutching a carved figurine of a gladiator with absurdly exaggerated abs. You watch him disappear into the night and wonder how long before the myth of the hero overtakes the man inside the helmet. And maybe that's the real core of it. Rome didn't love people. It loved personas, and gladiators, whether slaves or celebrities, were sculpted into the perfect erotic contradiction. Brutal yet beautiful, powerful yet owned. You leave the Colosseum's shadow behind, your sandals brushing across the same stones where thousands once cheered, swooned, and sometimes mourned. The moon hangs low now, and the city hums on. Somewhere, another champion prepares to die, or to dine, possibly both. You take a turn off the bustling thoroughfare, and the sounds of Rome soften into something grimmer. The clang of hammers, the shuffle of sandals, the occasional bark of a guard dog with too much attitude and not enough leash. You're entering a different Rome now, not the theatrical one of statues and temples, but the engine room of the empire, where human lives are bought, branded, and quietly bent to another's will. And at the center of this machinery, the slave economy, a structure so vast and so casual, it makes your modern sensibilities curl up like a fainting senator. You stop at a marketplace lined with shade awnings and muttered appraisals. Beneath one canvas, a man in a dusty tunic is inspecting the teeth of a teenage girl with all the tenderness of someone picking out a melon. The girl doesn't flinch. You realize with a shudder she's done this before. Mainstream fact: 1 in every 3 people in Rome was enslaved. They worked as cooks, scribes, farmers, tutors, accountants, entertainers, wet nurses, hairdressers, and yes, sexual companions. Not by invitation. By default, you drift closer to a stall displaying wax tablets with descriptions of the human inventory. One tablet reads, Sira, age 14, trained in singing, dancing, and personal service. Another says, Daphnis, attractive Gaulish boy, loyal, discreet, ideal for the domus. You don't need a Rosetta Stone to translate the subtext. And then there's the delicatus, a term whispered more than spoken. These were young boys handpicked for beauty, pampered like pets, and kept for delicate company. Often given jewelry, fine clothes, and even pet names. It sounds sweet until you realize they were owned like furniture. Emotions didn't negate the power imbalance. They just made it more tragic. One fringe tidbit. Some households were so invested in appearances, they curated their staff like Dacre. Guests might arrive to find matching slaves chosen for similar height, hair, or eye color, posed behind couches like human centerpieces. You pass a domus where the door stands ajar, revealing a slave scrubbing marble tiles on his knees. His master strolls by, absently patting his head like a lapdog. No words exchanged. No glance returned. Historians still argue whether Rome institutionalized sexual breeding among slaves, or if it happened in isolated pockets. But we know this. Some wealthy families kept records of lineage, pairing certain slaves for desirable offspring. It was less matchmaking, more livestock management, with love letters replaced by ledgers. The law, you soon learn, offered little shelter. Roman masters could sleep with enslaved men and women at will. It wasn't adultery. It wasn't scandal. It was routine. You overhear one merchant joking about his concubina, his house slave, and bed companion saying, "She's mine in every way but legal." The other man laughs and raises his wine cup in agreement. You resist the urge to throw a very large amphora. Still, not every story is bleak. Some slaves earned their freedom, bought it with tips, were freed in wills, or even married their former owners. You spot a bronze plaque marking the house of a once enslaved man turned wealthy spice trader. His wife, formerly his master's scribe. Now she runs the books, and possibly the house, but these are the exceptions. Tucked among thousands of nameless lives, swept into bedrooms, kitchens, and dark corners, without permission or voice. The city glitters above, but its gold is paved with exhaustion. As night stretches in, you pass a small shrine. Venus again, draped in flowers, smiling softly. Around her feet, offerings of fruit, coins, and a bronze bracelet engraved with the name Livia. You wonder who Livia was. A mistress, a slave, someone caught in the in-between. You don't stay long. You keep walking, feet aching, mind heavy. Rome's greatness didn't come free. And sometimes, what glittered in candlelight was someone else's chain. You escape the market's shadows, needing air, needing something lighter, or at least absurd enough to lift the weight pressing against your chest. So you follow the laughter. It leads you toward a busy crossroads where two men in tunics are debating directions with wild hand gestures. You squint. They're pointing toward a stone phallus. Yes, they are. Welcome to one of ancient Rome's stranger civic features, phallic statues as traffic signs. You spot it properly now, mounted casually on a wall like a street lamp. A proud, sculpted penis carved in relief, pointing left. Below it, an inscription barely visible in the lamplight. Some version of, "This way to pleasure." Or maybe it's just, "Good luck, traveler." Either way, it's not exactly what you'd expect on a public building. Mainstream fact. Phallic symbols were common markers in Rome, particularly in Pompeii, where dozens have been found on walls, fountains, and even street pavements, though some clearly indicated brothels. Others were simply apotropaic, meant to ward off evil and bring good fortune. You turn down the indicated street and notice another, a tiny wind chime of flying bronze phalluses jingling outside a bakery. You blink. Is this a very weird dream? A woman laughs from a window above and shouts, "Careful." He points toward Julia's place. Whether that's a joke or a legitimate brothel review, you're not sure. Either way, you take a mental note, a fringe tidbit. Romans often gifted phallic wind chimes, called tintinnabula, to newlyweds, or hung them in doorways to keep away bad luck. Some had multiple appendages. Some were even combined with animal bodies, flying donkey penises with bells. You know, for protection. Historians still argue whether all these signs meant brothel this way, or if some were just, well, motivational sculptures. Imagine wandering a city where you can't tell whether the art is a sex ad or a holy charm. Welcome to Rome. You step into a small plaza where a statue of Mercury, god of travelers, stands proudly wearing nothing but a cloak and a confident grin. At his feet, another erect pointer, this one carefully polished by time or tourists, probably both. A few children dash past, giggling, as one slaps the statue's base and shouts, "Lead me home, Mercury." Their mother scolds them, but without much conviction. Even temples weren't exempt. You recall seeing carved phalluses on sacred altars, alongside grapes, dolphins, and sheaves of wheat. Because in Rome, fertility, abundance, and laughter often walked hand in hand with scandal. You pass a tavern with a carved stone embedded near its threshold. A crude depiction of a man bent over, followed by the Latin equivalent of "enter here" for satisfaction. You don't. Not tonight. Instead, you find a spot to sit a crumbling step beside an old fountain. Water gurgles peacefully, and above it, another tiny stone figure grins down. Not quite obscene this time. More cheeky, and that's the tone Rome seems to strike again and again. A culture that paints the sacred with smirks, wraps the vulgar in marble, and leaves modern tourists wondering whether to laugh, cry, or politely avert their eyes. As you rest your back, a wine seller passes, dragging a cart full of sloshing amphorae. You catch part of his song. What points the way is not the hand, he winks. The rest is left to your imagination, and so, with the echoes of laughter and the pointing stones behind you, you rise once more. There's still so much of the city's tangled soul to wander through. Gods, virgins, rites you probably shouldn't witness, but you're here now, and you're not turning back. You wander uphill again, past taverns shutting their shutters, and perfume merchants packing away their fragrant wares. The air smells of wine, garlic, and candle smoke, but soon another scent wafts toward you: incense, thick and sticky, curling in strange patterns through the night air. It leads you toward a low marble building humming with laughter music. And is that a flute or just someone really bad at whistling? You've arrived at a festival of the cult of Priapus, Rome's most gleefully inappropriate god. You hesitate at the entrance. A painted banner hangs overhead, bearing the unmistakable figure of Priapus. Part man, part myth, all genitals, and not subtle genitals either. You've seen sword hilts smaller than what he's carrying. Inside, a crowd dances in chaotic circles around an oversized wooden statue. It's Priapus again, painted bright red, draped in garlands, and offering a smile that lands somewhere between welcoming and unhinged. His appendage has been lovingly oiled. Several times, it seems. Mainstream fact, Priapus was a minor fertility god, protector of gardens, livestock, and male virility. He was often invoked for luck, fertility, and keeping birds and thieves away from vineyards, which is quite the resume for a guy mostly remembered for his permanent erection. You edge around the crowd and observe the offerings at the statue's feet. Figs, onions, small ceramic phalluses, honey cakes, and curiously, cabbages. A local explains, slurring slightly. It's symbolic. You decide not to ask for clarification. A priestess, robed in red and grinning, like she's had too much fermented pomegranate juice, begins a chant that quickly devolves into a limerick about donkeys. Laughter erupts. Someone toasts Priapus. Someone else spills wine on his foot. No one seems offended. One fringe tidbit. Priapus was sometimes depicted with a scale, weighing his phallus against sacks of grain or fruit. The metaphor was never subtle. You picture him applying for a job. Skills include blessing orchards, measuring abundance, and terrifying trespassers. Historians still argue how serious these rituals were. Were they heartfelt acts of devotion, comic relief from Rome's oppressive gods, or just an excuse for a party with fruit-shaped cakes and unfiltered poetry? Probably yes to all of it. You watch as a woman kisses the statue's base, then tosses a handful of herbs onto a small flame. A man beside her mutters a prayer involving goats and twins. You suspect he's improvising. Nearby, a table offers priapic amulets for sale. Tiny pendants shaped like winged penises, chariots pulled by phalluses, and even one in the form of a chicken with, well, let's just say creative anatomy. You're tempted, briefly, for research, of course. There's something oddly comforting in the absurdity. In a society obsessed with discipline, hierarchy, and stoicism, the cult of Priapus is an unapologetic celebration of the ridiculous. It mocks seriousness, punctures pomposity, and makes everyone just a little bit uncomfortable on purpose. And yet, Priapus had his darker sides. Some rural shrines included warnings. If you steal from this garden, Priapus will strike you down. The punishment, usually involving penetration, sometimes symbolic, sometimes not. You pause at a fresco on the wall, a vivid image of Priapus scaring off a would-be thief mid-flight, trousers comically lowered. It's like a Looney Tunes episode dipped in myth. The music swells again, and someone throws a wreath onto the statue's head. A cheer rises. Someone starts reciting verses from the Priapeia, an ancient collection of poems so explicit it would make modern rappers blush. You catch only snippets, but they involve figs, thistles, and one very unlucky sailor. Eventually, the crowd begins to disperse, still giggling, still swaying. The statue remains, proud and unashamed. Priapus watches the last worshipper stumble away with his garland around his neck, and one sandal missing. You exit the shrine with a strange peace. Rome might worship Jupiter in marble halls, but tonight it worshipped laughter, absurdity, and anatomical honesty, a balance of sacred and silly that somehow weirdly works. You tug your cloak tighter against the breeze and whisper a small thanks to the god of gardens and erections, not for blessings, but for reminding you that even the mighty empire of Rome needed to laugh at itself. The night deepens as you descend into the quieter heart of Rome. Torches flicker low, casting long, theatrical shadows on cracked columns and weary courtyards. Your sandals echo softly now. The streets are emptier, but ahead, glowing like a lantern tucked in the folds of the city, is a marble temple, pristine and austere. You pause at its base and look up at the inscription, Temple of Vesta, home of the famed Vestal Virgins, home of purity, of fire, of rules so strict they make gladiator games look like spa days. And tonight, you're about to tiptoe past the veil and into one of Rome's strangest contradictions, where enforced chastity was more terrifying than any orgy. Mainstream fact. The Vestal Virgins were a select group of 6 priestesses chosen as young girls, usually around 6 or 7 years old, to serve the goddess Vesta, keeper of the sacred flame. They were sworn to 30 years of celibacy on penalty of death. Yes, death. No pressure, little one. You step into the circular temple and are met with a silence that's almost alive. In the center, the eternal flame. It crackles softly, undisturbed for centuries. The air smells like smoke, sandalwood, and a faint hint of ceremonial anxiety. A Vestal in cream robes glides by, balancing a silver pitcher. Her face is serene, but you can see it, the weight of perfection etched into her shoulders. If she trips, drops it, or stumbles in her duties, the punishment is public scorn, whipping, or worse. Fringe tidbit: during festivals, Vestals were given front row seats at games, special privileges in court, and even their own litters carried through the streets. But behind that celebrity status was constant surveillance. Their virtue wasn't just personal, it was political capital. Historians still argue whether all of the Vestals maintained celibacy, or whether some managed secret liaisons. There are whispered stories, half true perhaps, of guards, senators, or even emperors who tried to seduce them. Some succeeded. Most who got caught paid the price. You drift toward a small side altar, The wall behind it is carved with the tale of one such fall, a vestal named Cornelia, buried alive for breaking her vow. No trial, no appeal, just a tomb sealed behind her as the crowd watched in silence. A flicker of the flame, a flicker of mercy extinguished. The logic, according to Rome, you couldn't spill a vestal's blood, so the punishment had to be clean. Underground, symbolic, horrific, but neat. You try to imagine what it must have been like, your entire identity woven around not feeling anything, not longing, not touching, not dreaming in the direction of heat. And all the while, the city around you bubbling with temptation, one whispered joke, often told by Roman men after a few cups of wine. The vestals burn with more than fire, which is, perhaps, both cruel and true. You exit the temple and find yourself in the house of the vestals, the cloistered residence behind the shrine. It's strangely quiet here, filled with long porticos, small fountains, and birds roosting under the eaves. The contrast with everything else you've seen tonight is stark. No laughter, no suggestive statues, no wine-stained poetry, just discipline carved into stone. And yet, even here, behind the marble silence, Rome's obsession with purity reveals its own twisted nature. These women weren't free. They were idealized prisoners, locked in virginity so tightly that their fall from grace was treated like divine betrayal. You imagine one girl, barely 10, staring into the fire, not knowing yet what it means to be untouched forever. Another 20 years in, flinching at the sight of a lover's gaze she'll never return. And the last, nearing release, wondering what comes after a lifetime of silence. Because when their 30 years were done, vestals could marry. But most didn't. Many were too revered, too feared, too far removed from desire to find their way back to it. You look over your shoulder one last time at the flickering flame, the eternal virgin, always burning, never touched, forever watched, and then you step away, letting the fire glow behind you, quiet, perfect, and impossibly sad. You drift through moon-silvered streets, lulled by the quiet murmur of fountains and the rustle of fig trees, until the smell of crushed blossoms and smoke draws you toward a plaza throbbing with energy. Garlands hang from statues. Cymbals crash somewhere in the distance. And half the city, it seems, is drunk before sundown. Congratulations. You've arrived at one of Rome's ancient fertility festivals, that delightful intersection of sacred ritual, public indecency, and borderline interpretive dance. A priestess in a crown of ivy beckons with wine-stained fingers. You follow, because of course you do. The air is thick with perfume, sweat, and anticipation. This is the festival of Floralia, honoring Flora, goddess of flowers, sex, and springtime chaos. Mainstream fact. Held in late April, Floralia was one of Rome's most uninhibited celebrations. Citizens were encouraged to wear bright colors, drink copiously, and engage in games, theater, and acts that today would require at least 2 waivers and a private venue. You find a spot near the center of the square, where a group of performers in sheer tunics begins a pantomime play involving a shepherd, a nymph, and a comically large fig. The crowd hoots and whistles as the actors chase each other in increasingly suggestive ways. A child giggles. An old man cries. A goat eats someone's headpiece. Scholars still argue whether these performances were symbolic or simply soft-core entertainment for bored senators, probably both. The line between religious offering and street cabaret was always porous in Rome. One fringe detail: during Floralia, prostitutes were given a day of public celebration, free to dance, joke, and mock the upper classes. It was the one time a noblewoman might be heckled by a courtesan and have to laugh politely in response. You spot one such woman now, swirling her skirt as she tosses rose petals into the crowd. Balancing a clay cup on her head, she locks eyes with a stern-looking magistrate and blows him a kiss. He blushes. Then he bows. Rules, apparently, take the day off during Flora's reign. In another corner, a mock gladiator fight breaks out, with men stripped down to loincloths, playfully whacking each other with garlands instead of swords. A chariot race follows, except the chariots are bathtubs. The horses are actors in sheep masks, and the winner receives a cabbage. The fertility theme isn't subtle. You pass a temple where offerings overflow flowers, fruits, and small ceramic animals. A woman chants a hymn while holding a basket of barley, her voice slow and rhythmic, calling for healthy crops, abundant babies, and a mild winter. A young man offers a prayer for a wife with strong hips and a soft voice. You give him a wide berth, but not all rituals are playful. In the shadows of the temple, a goat is led to a low altar, crowned with vines. The priest raises a blade. You turn away before the offering is made, but the cheers tell you it's done. The blood will be mixed with wine, sprinkled across fields, or poured at the base of trees. Not for gore, but for growth. Rome believed in balance. Life required death, pleasure required sacrifice, and every blooming season had roots in something darker. You find a quiet ledge and sit, sipping wine someone handed you unprompted. Around you, the city celebrates its messy, glorious biology, unashamed of its bodies, its urges, or its laughter. This isn't debauchery. It's ritual, and Rome, in its own wild way, takes it very seriously. As the evening deepens, the music grows stranger. Flutes trill dissonantly. A woman chants in Greek. Someone dances in a lion's skin. Another strips naked and dives into a fountain. No one blinks. You look up at the stars and realize this city worships life by embodying it in all its absurdity and awkwardness. It makes sacred space for seduction, for laughter, for longing, even for the goat. You rise, petals stuck to your tunic, and walk onward into the deepening night, leaving behind a celebration that refuses to be anything but fully, wildly alive. Rome never truly sleeps, but but it does slouch into something stranger after midnight. The air is cooler now, the drunken songs fewer, and the shadows stretch longer than they should. You find yourself walking through a quiet garden behind a villa, fragrant with myrtle and basil. A statue of Mars glowers at you from the hedgerow, but it's not war you're thinking of tonight. It's power and how Rome's emperors, especially the unhinged ones, used sex as both a weapon and a game. You're here to peel back the silk curtain on some of Rome's most scandalous rulers, and while you may have heard whispers of Caligula or Nero, nothing prepares you for how deeply weird things got behind palace doors. Mainstream fact: emperors were technically gods in progress. What they did behind closed doors was rarely challenged, unless it got very public or very expensive. This meant that their private behaviors, especially of the more exotic variety, were largely unchecked. And unchecked power, well, it gets creative. Let's start with Caligula, who reigned for 4 chaotic years in the 1st century AD. Officially, he was the 3rd emperor of Rome. Unofficially, he was the empire's most theatrical horror show. One night, Caligula supposedly lined up the wives of his senators at a banquet, inspected them like horses, and took his pick for the evening with commentary. Later, he returned to the dining table and shared performance reviews with their husbands. You sip your wine a little slower now. Fringe tidbit: Caligula allegedly married his sister, slept with the others, and once considered having his horse appointed consul. While historians debate the details, was it satire, slander, or psychosis? The overall theme is clear. He wanted Rome to squirm. And then there's Nero, whose decadent lifestyle could make even Caligula blush. You pass a fresco of him now, rosy cheeks, a harp in one hand, Rome on fire in the background, a bit dramatic, even for a statue. Nero fancied himself a performer, poet, and divine seducer. He held public weddings to his lovers, both men and women, including a boy named Sporus, whom Nero had castrated and dressed as an empress. They were wed in a lavish ceremony, and Sporus was made to accompany Nero in full bridal regalia, attending state functions as his royal consort. Historians still argue, was this deranged romanticism, a twisted joke, or simply an emperor trying to rescript the entire Roman moral code to suit his fantasies? You duck into a covered portico and overhear a group of slaves gossiping in hushed Latin. They speak of Commodus, son of Marcus Aurelius, who liked to fight as a gladiator by day and indulge in masked orgies by night. He renamed Rome after himself twice, and often pretended to be Hercules in the bedroom, complete with lion skins and club. One slave swears she once saw Commodus paint himself gold from head to toe before chasing his concubines around a banquet hall like a divine predator. Whether true or not, the image is difficult to unsee, but the emperors didn't just indulge, they manipulated. Sex was a currency, and they used it to elevate, humiliate, or destroy. A rival senator's wife might become a concubine. A trusted general's son might receive attention. Loyalty was tested through flesh. You pass a courtyard where torches burn low around a reflecting pool. In its still waters, you imagine Rome's emperors staring back, not as gods, but as lonely, terrified men trying to dominate something they couldn't control, desire. You pause, wondering, were they victims of their own myth? Or just very bored men with unlimited access to figs, feathers, and frightened flutists? Either way, their legacy remains, a tangle of worship and whispers, decadence wrapped in purple silk, remembered not for glory, but for excess. You step back into the street, moonlight catching the worn stone beneath your feet. A statue of Augustus watches from a column above, stoic and unimpressed by his successor's antics. You tip your head to him, one of the few who kept his tunic on more often than not, and move along. The emperors are done for now. But Rome still has more strange rooms to show you. You wander beyond the marble courtyards and into a darker stretch of alleyways where the air smells faintly of iron, old wax, and something oddly herbal. The torches here burn lower, more secretive, and the faces around you seem sharper, more alert. You've stumbled into the realm of Roman magic, specifically the side of it steeped in love, lust, and revenge. Here, in backrooms and smoky apartments above bakeries, women in cloaks mix powders by lamplight. Men whisper verses in dead languages. And in tiny clay jars, ancient curses curl like sleeping snakes waiting. Mainstream fact: magic in ancient Rome magia was a gray area of the law. It was illegal to use it to harm, but common enough to be used for love, protection, and gaining favor. And like everything else in Rome, sex and magic were frequent bedfellows. You stop at a humble shop with painted shutters and a small clay figurine hanging over the door. Inside, a middle-aged woman named Livia is mixing a paste that smells like vinegar, ash, and desperation. She beckons you in with a finger crooked like a question mark. You learn quickly, this is a love potion intended to win back a cheating husband. Livia says she needs 3 things: a lock of his hair, menstrual blood, and crushed beetles. You grimace. She winks. One fringe tidbit: Romans believed that spells cast with bodily fluids were stronger, especially for lust. Sweat, tears, nail clippings, even other things. All fair game for the determined sorceress. You watch as she wraps the mixture in linen, ties it with red thread, and whispers a spell that ends in the name of Venus, but also something darker, Medea, perhaps. You're not sure. Across town, you visit a tavern where a man shows you his defixio, a curse tablet. It's a thin sheet of lead, scrawled with tiny letters and pierced with a nail. He tells you it's meant to ruin his rival's bedroom performance. Not kill him, he says cheerfully. Just make him disappointing. Historians still debate how seriously Romans took these curses. Some say they were symbolic, a psychological dagger. Others argue that belief in their power was so strong, it worked because it was believed. Magic, after all, thrives in fear. You spot a group gathered in a moonlit courtyard, circling a small fire. One woman pours wine onto the flames while chanting names. Another buries a wax figurine, shaped like a man, into a hole dug in the earth. "He will dream only of me," she murmurs. You slowly back away. Later, in a temple of Hecate, goddess of magic and crossroads, you see offerings: garlic, eggs, little dolls made of straw. The priestess here wears a necklace of bones and tells you love magic is half prayer, half threat. You believe her, and yet, not all spells were dark. Some women gave their daughters herbal charms to inspire gentleness in their husbands. Men drank potions to become more virile. One man even swears by a cream made from crocodile dung and myrrh. "It brings passion," he says. You nod and slowly inch away. There were also dream rituals, ways to invade another's sleep. One recipe involves mint, poppy seeds, and ink made from cuttlefish. The spell, written in mirror script, must be buried under the target's threshold. Then, the seller says, they wake needing you. You wonder how many hearts in Rome were held not by love, but by whispered names under the bed. As you leave the alley, the air feels thicker, as if secrets are clinging to your cloak. You pass a fountain and hear someone humming, an old woman stirring something in a clay pot. You don't ask what it is. Rome may have been built on law and order, but it ran on longing too. And for those without coin or power, magic offered a way to tip the scales, even if it meant getting a little dirty. Or a lot. You step into the main street again, blinking into the brighter torchlight, and feel as though you've surfaced from underwater. The love spells, the cursed tablets, the moonlit jars there behind you now. Probably you walk now with a slightly more suspicious glance over your shoulder, half expecting to find a wax doll in your likeness buried under someone's doorstep. But the city feels calmer again. The torches burn more confidently here. The marble returns. The alleys widen. And ahead, tucked behind a mosaic-tiled wine shop, you find a small case of bronze coins, glinting under glass. They're not just coins, they're spintry, tiny tokens stamped with images so risque. You'd think someone had hacked a modern nightclub loyalty program into ancient currency. Mainstream fact: spintry were small brass or bronze tokens, roughly the size of a denarius, usually engraved with explicit sexual imagery. On one side, positions, preferences, and sometimes multiple participants, and a Roman numeral on the other. You pick one up with a handkerchief, because hygiene, and stare at it. A couple mid-embrace, doing something best described as acrobatic. You turn it over. The number VII. 7th room, 7th service. Lucky 7. Historians still argue what they were for. Were they tokens for brothels, letting patrons pay in advance without exchanging official currency? Or were they locker keys at bathhouses, used to match your token with a cubbyhole while you, conducted your business, or perhaps, more mischievously, they were gag gifts. The ancient equivalent of a novelty mug. To Gaius, on his retirement, may your loins stay stronger than your knees. One fringe detail, these tokens never feature the emperor's likeness, which strongly suggests they weren't official Roman currency. Putting the emperor's face beside an explicit scene would have been frowned upon. To put it mildly, you imagine a wealthy man arriving at a discreet doorway late at night, pulling out a spintria marked X and sliding it across a marble counter. A bored attendant checks the number, rings a tiny bell, and gestures him down the hallway. Or maybe he just needed a towel from locker 10. That's the beauty of these tokens, they're slippery. Not just in topic, but in meaning. And Rome, ever fond of duality, likely used them for multiple things: practical, illicit, comedic. You notice a few spintrii framed along the wall of a nearby tavern. One has been turned into a pendant, the hole drilled cleanly through the top. Its wearer, a toothless old woman pouring wine, grins when she sees you looking. He liked it enough to keep it, she says, jerking her chin toward the image. You don't ask who. And brothels. Oh yes, they existed, regulated, taxed, and widespread. The Latin word lupaner, from lupa she-wolf, became synonymous with houses of pleasure. Some even had menus. You know this because one spintria bears an image that matches a wall painting in Pompeii's largest brothel. Artistic consistency is everything, after all. But the tokens weren't just about access. They were symbols of anonymity, allowing one to indulge without leaving behind a name, just a number, a whisper, and a coin that jingled with suggestion. You watch as a young man buys a replica from a street vendor and pockets it with a wink. Is he collecting history or planning a very specific kind of evening? One theory claims the tokens were made during Tiberius's reign, when coins couldn't bear his image in disreputable settings. So instead, Rome invented sex coins without emperors, a workaround as brilliant as it was scandalous. You turn your coin over once more, squinting at the engraving. The artistry is shockingly detailed. You wonder how many hands it passed through, how many stories it never told, how many people saw it not as smut, but as part of daily life, like a subway token, but hornier. You drop it gently back into its tray and walk on, the metallic ring echoing behind you. Rome, you're beginning to realize, had no interest in separating the sacred from the sordid. Even its change purses came with innuendo, and as you vanish into the night, you find yourself reaching for your own pockets, half hoping, half fearing that a small bronze token marked X might be rattling around in there. By now, you've seen most of what Rome dares to show you: the bathhouses, the brothels, the statues that point with more than just fingers. But tonight still has one more curtain to lift, one woven with silk, stitched with perfume, and worn by people who never quite fit into Rome's tidy definitions. You step into a villa on the edge of the Subura district, a place where lines blur between theater and identity, between masculinity and softness, between societal roles and secret lives. Tonight, we explore cross-dressing and gender play in ancient Rome, a practice not hidden in whispers, but often celebrated in song, scandal, and satire. Mainstream fact: though Rome prized stoic masculinity and military discipline, it also carved out curious spaces for gender fluidity, especially in private circles, religious rituals, and performance. The contradiction: Rome disdained the idea of effeminacy in public men, while enthusiastically paying to see it on stage. You take a seat in a smoky parlor where a group of men and women, some clearly neither, are laughing over cups of wine, their tunics dyed in brilliant purples and greens. A slender figure with a painted face strums a lyre, singing a love song originally written for a woman. No one cares. No one corrects. A young man next to you, called Livia tonight, adjusts their wig and says, "Gender is a costume. We just wear it better." You raise your cup in agreement. Fringe tidbit: the galley, priests of the goddess Cybele, were often biologically male, but lived and dressed as women. Having undergone self-castration as a form of ecstatic devotion, they danced through the streets during festivals, wore long robes, makeup, and jewelry, and were both feared and revered. Rome tolerated them, but only just. Historians still argue whether the galley were Rome's version of a third gender or simply religious outcasts, but there's no denying their presence rattled the empire's rigid moral compass. You pass a marble relief in a side room, an actor on stage, mid-scene, playing a bride. The mask is frozen in serene joy, but the figure beneath wears the boots of a man. Theater was Rome's greatest loophole, a place where gender could be swapped, stretched, or abandoned entirely without consequence, as long as it stayed on stage. But of course, it didn't. One senator's diary, read in hushed tones by poets, described dressing as a woman in private, throwing secret salons where guests swapped identities as freely as they did partners. There were no rules, only velvet and laughter. You hear tales of emperors who experimented, not just with lovers, but with presentation. Elagabalus, in particular, is said to have requested to be called lady, offered gold to any physician who could transform him into a woman, and surrounded himself with a harem of lovers, regardless of their gender. Was it identity, power play, performance art? Rome couldn't decide, and historians still can't. You peek behind a curtain and find a group practicing a dance, men in flowing stolas, women in armor, everyone smiling. There's no ridicule here, just release. And then the mood shifts. A comic poet begins a recitation, roasting a rival politician for sounding like a girl in the Senate. The laughter here is different, sharper. Rome still punished effeminacy in the wrong context, mocking softness in politics while paying for it in private. It's a city of masks, and timing is everything. A whispered joke from across the room. In Rome, everyone's straight until the wine runs out. You're starting to believe it. As you prepare to leave, Livia stops you and asks if you'd like to borrow a scarf, something to confuse the gods. You smile and decline, but the offer feels sacred. This is a sanctuary, temporary, fragile, but real. You step back into the night, the moon high and unbothered by human rules. The streets are quiet now, but you know, behind every curtain, every locked door, someone in Rome is dancing as someone else, and feeling, for a moment, more truly themselves. It's nearly morning now. Rome, at last, begins to exhale. The streets that once rang with laughter, lute music, and clinking wine cups are now washed in pale blue dawn. Merchants doze behind carts. Temple flames sputter with fatigue. A rooster crows in the distance, arrogantly, as if it hasn't missed most of the night's action. You've walked through marble and mud, theater and temple, ritual and rumor. But now, you find yourself tucked inside a narrow insula, a Roman apartment block, creaking gently with the weight of sleepers above. The city might glorify its villas, statues, and gods. But this is where most Romans lived, and where they loved. Or, more accurately, where they coupled, stumbled, and tried to sleep through their neighbors' noises. You step lightly over a discarded sandal and enter a cramped upper room. The air smells like olive oil, old wine, and last night's stew. A low bed sags under the weight of two figures, curled together, tangled in wool and exhaustion. They're not nobility, not gods, just people, one snoring lightly, the other blinking into sleep as if they're still dreaming. A clay lamp flickers on the sill, casting long shadows across the wall, where someone has scratched a heart and the word amo, I love, mainstream fact. Most Romans lived in shared spaces with thin walls, and sexual activity was rarely private. You heard your neighbors. Sometimes you smelled them. If you were lucky, you ignored them. A man shuffles past in the hallway with a bucket. Someone else coughs. A baby wails, then stops. Life resumes its slow churn. Even pleasure in Rome must make room for duty. One fringe tidbit: in some apartments, bedroom walls were reinforced with double masonry, not for soundproofing, but to hang mosaics more securely. Though you'd be forgiven for assuming otherwise, historians still argue what the average Roman thought of all this. Was it romance, obligation, habit? In the inscriptions, you find all three. Some write about wild passion. Others complain. He comes home drunk, sleeps like a goat, and snores like Vulcan's hammer. Sounds familiar. You peek into a neighboring unit, one bed, 3 occupants, and a fourth snoring from a pallet on the floor. Maybe they're a family, maybe not. Rome never obsessed over categories. What mattered was surviving, and sometimes that meant sharing heat, bread, and breath with whomever was there. You pause at a window. The sky is pink now. In the courtyard below, a woman hangs sheets. One flutters loose and drapes over a statue of Minerva. goddess of wisdom, now wearing someone's undergarment like a veil. You smile, because after all the outrageous scenes, the shocking practices, the rituals and statues and tokens and festivals, this quiet room, this exhausted couple, this sleepy city is the real end of the story. Rome didn't survive because of orgies or curses or flying penis charms. It survived because even after all that, people still curled together at the end of the day, still whispered silly things in each other's ears, still left hearts scratched into dusty walls. This is how history truly breathes. So now, dear listener, you rest. The flickering torchlight of Rome has dimmed. The bathhouses are empty. The market stalls covered. Even the statues, ever vigilant, seem to soften under morning light. You've walked through alleyways of scandal and temples of longing. You've peeked behind curtains no textbook dares describe, and you've smiled at carvings left by hands long turned to dust. And what did you find? That beneath the gods, the marble, the grandeur Rome was deeply, profoundly human. Messy, curious, lustful, sacred, often all at once. The lovers, the spellcasters, the dancers in lion skins, they were reaching for something. Connection, power, maybe just comfort in the dark. Maybe you are too. So take a deep breath now. Let the weight of togas and terracotta melt away. Let the quiet settle in your chest like dust in a sunbeam. You are safe now. The empire is at peace. The secrets have been told. The candles burned low. And even Priapus has called it a night. Feel the stone beneath your feet give way to soft linens. The laughter fading into silence. The streetlight becoming moonlight. The moonlight becoming sleep. Breathe in, hold it, let go. You've survived a night in ancient Rome. Even Caligula didn't manage that some days. Now sleep, traveler. Tomorrow, the empire will wait.